I'm going to turn my camera off for a moment.
Well, hello, everyone. My name is Lenny Minna-Hoppenworth, and this is the ILVOTE call. So we've been doing these calls ever since 2017. And before that, I was not politically active at all. I just got active after Trump got elected, didn't know what to do, and decided that I wanted to start learning about our democratic process. And lo and behold, I discovered that the Illinois allows people to become deputy voter registrars. And so I became one of those. And then I discovered that you could actually invite other people to be deputy voter registrars with you. So I started doing that within my own business, Chicago Dance Supply, because all you have to do is have an organization or a business. And we got hundreds of people to become deputy voter registrars since 2017. Since then, we've evolved and we've become ILVOTE, which is just all about helping people to register to vote. We can help people become deputy voter registrars in your election authority. And then once you become a deputy voter registrar, you can register anyone in the state of Illinois. But we did a lot of educating amongst ourselves, because many of us who started out our political activism started out in the women's marches in 2017. And I can't believe that it's coming up again in January already. And actually after the women's marches is when I met many of the folks that I still think of today as, you know, co-conspirators or mentors or sisters in this, you know, fight to defend our democracy. And I'm really excited to be able to introduce you to Betty Magness, who we're going to talk to for the next hour on this call, ILVOTE. So at this time, I would invite everybody to mute their microphones so that we can all have really good reception so we can hear Betty. And then if you have any questions, definitely put them in the chat. And I promise you, you will have lots of questions. And we hope to have a discussion for sure about the action steps that we could take in the last 20 minutes of this call. So thank you all for being here. Again, my name is Lenny Minna-Hoppenworth. I'm on the north side of Chicago, but I know many of you are here from all over the state. And if you're just jumping on, we just got started, and I'm about to introduce Betty Magness.
Different factors to get your fruit, not just your
Thank you for muting yourself so that we can, there you go, have clear reception. So see Betty Magness. She is a civil rights activist for over 40 years. She was a facilitator for the 1996 Democratic National Committee Training Academy and the first African-Americans elected state chair of the Independent Voters of Illinois Independent Precinct Organization, which is the IVI-IPO. Currently, she's a co-chair of the Chicago Women Take Action, CWTA, and the Illinois political director of the National Rainbow Push Coalition. Betty is a member of the Policy Council of Citizen Action Illinois. And in January 2020, she represented League of Women Voters at their focus workshop at the Union League Club, discussing the importance of the census 2020. Currently, Betty is the Vice President of Citizen Engagement on the Chicago Board of the League of Women Voters and board member of the IVI-IPO. In November of 2020, she was awarded the Spirit of 76 Award from the Independent Voters of Illinois Independent Precinct Organization, IVI-IPO. And Betty has lived in the 7th Congressional District for 33 years. Everyone, please welcome Betty Magness. And so Betty, in the introduction, I was marveling at all the organizations that you are involved in. And one of them Chicago Women Take Action, that is really close to my heart because I remember taking many of my first photos after the Women's March with the Chicago Women Take Action group. But really what I'm floored by time and time again is in this moment, so many of us are stepping forward, even though they have not been politically active before. And I am really interested in your story, Betty, how you have come to this place. You didn't just magically appear on the scene and be involved with all of these organizations. At one point, you decided that this is really important to you. So I would love to first start out with a little bit about your background and where you grew up and a little bit about your family, if you don't mind.
Sure. Okay, so let me start by saying, and then I hope by the end of my speaking, everyone else will have the same information. I live in the 7th Congressional District, the 42nd Ward, the 13th Senatorial District, the 26th Legislative District, the 3rd County Board of District, and the 3rd Board of Review District. That is your political address. And if you don't know it now, you should know it before I finish speaking, because I always start off with what is considered my political address. I went to elementary school. I was born and raised here in Chicago, and I lived in what was considered a Japanese neighborhood, but is now called Brownsville. That's another long story, which if you look it up on Google, you can probably find out that that is where the Japanese settled in Chicago when they were released from the concentration camp. I have been married. I have 2 children, 2 sons, 4 grandchildren, and I had 5, but 1 is deceased. And I have 2 what I call niece daughters. My first picket line was at the Wilson Junior College campus shop. It was the first time I got actively involved, and we accused what would now be considered sexual harassment by the owner, and of course, by the manager, and we of course ended up getting. Fast forward to 1968 during Civil Rights Movement, I got involved in the Southern Christian Leadership Conference Operation Breadbasket in August of 1968, very shortly after Dr. King was killed. And I volunteered and then became a staff into Operation Push, which transitioned into the Rainbow Push Coalition up to date. I was the Midwest Regional Director for Reverend Jesse Jackson's 88 presidential campaign, which was a really exciting time in my life. And I left after the campaign. I went to work for former Ambassador Carol Mosley Braun, who at that time I was her scheduler when she became the first African-American clerk, recorder of deeds. I then went on to work for the clerk of the circuit court as assistant chief deputy, where I stayed for 20 years until I retired. During this whole period, I volunteered in independent political campaigns, and I volunteered at Rainbow Push. I started working with voter registration when Alistair Gay, with the late Alistair Gay, who was part of the lobbyists to get voter registration registrars as a law in Illinois. And back in that time, we've registered inmates at Cook County Correctional Center, and Rainbow Push for the last 40 years has gone to the jail every year on Christmas Day and done a program and also registered voters there. It was alleged that the late Mayor Harold Washington won by a little more than the margin of votes that came out of the Cook County jail. So people have not really wanted people in jail to vote, but if you haven't been convicted of a crime, you're eligible to vote. And that's a story that's been going around for a while. I've registered with Rainbow Push and League of Women Voters in high schools, junior colleges, churches, and even community events. And in the 2016 general election, I went to my alma mater, which is Hyde Park Academy, and the civics teacher had a program and invited candidates to come and speak. And I took Reverend Jackson along with me because I was going because I was an alumnus of the school. And we had been registering voters, and we took 125 students to early vote at the early voting site, 1 block from the school. And most of them, it was their very first time ever voting. And boy, were they ever excited. So when you register voters, it really means something. I also worked with Just Democracy on a brochure for Know Your Rights, which is a brochure that was put together for returning offenders from prison that tells them about their right to vote, that once they have been released, they are made able to vote. So, hope I'm not boring you, but what have I done lately? Thursday, October 1st, Reverend Jesse Jackson, Dr. Barbara Armwine, and attorney Daryl Jones and I were organizers of the very first John Lewis Good Trouble March to the ballot box, votercade in this country. They later had them all over the country, but the very first one was in Chicago. Yay for Chicago. We're always right on top of things. The motorcade of 50 plus cars had sororities, fraternities, Harold Washington Legacy Committee, you name it, they were part of that votercade. Then on May 8th, we organized, we were part of the National John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Action Day to defeat voter suppression. We had car brigades from 4 areas of the city, Rainbow Push, Malcolm X, Lane Tech, and Evanston, and there were other votercades in DuPage County and other areas, but we ended ours at 31st and the Lakefront, where we had speakers from our local congresspersons and people from all over the country on our big jumbotron. SEIU Healthcare was a major organizer in that fight. And then July 17th, we celebrated the late John Lewis's birthday. And those of you who have been down the lakefront know that for several months, there was a statue of Dr. King and Malcolm X that sat directly east of Buckingham Fountain. And that was where we had the Chicago Candlelight Vigil. And that they were done by, the statue was done by an African-American artist. And he was so pleased that we brought attention to his work. And I hope that those of you that went down DuSable Point, DuSable Lakeshore Drive, got a chance to see those statues, because they had to be removed because the winds, especially winds like today, they would not have been able to stand. Lastly, I spent 8 days in Brunswick, Georgia during the jury selection for the Ahmaud Arbery trial. Now, Brunswick is about 53% African-American, roughly 45, 46% Caucasian, and then a mixture. And we have always thought that Southern towns like that were really, really racist, and what they did to Ahmaud Arbery was horrible. But we found out that the people in that town were so upset by what happened. They could not believe that their town was going to be pictured that way. I went with 100 people from across the country, and we were outside the courthouse every day. And a group of clergy came, a rabbi, priest, evangelical minister, a Baptist minister, and they had a big sign, clergy for justice for Ahmaud. And it was like the town became unified around what had happened. And they had their first African-American mayor. He came over to us, and a major who was African-American was head of the state police, and the sheriff for that county came over. They came over every day and they talked to us and they thanked us for coming to Brunswick. So when the defense attorney got up and said, well, we don't want any more of these Black pastors coming, everybody was taken aback because that was not what was going on at all. And it was a real experience to go there. I was so glad I went. And anybody who's listening, if you get the opportunity to go to a place where you feel that someone has been unjustly accused, take the time to do it. Because I have that incident that one time, and I have a lot of them in my history that I can thank God that I went and I was there at the time. But you always remember that your children remember more where you took them than what you told them. I took my kids to picket lines when they were growing up, and they grew up to be civil rights activists and fighters. And I guess I bored you enough now. That's enough about me. Thank you very much, Lenny, for having me. And I hope I wasn't too boring.
Oh my goodness, Betty, stop. We are just getting started. Well, first of all, I wanted to appreciate what you just shared, Betty, about going to Brunswick, and because we saw those tweets saying that they didn't want clergy there, and it's enlightening to know that the town was with you and you were with the town, and that it was important for you to show up with those 100 people that came from all over the country that was there. So thank you for doing that.
Can I add one more thing?
Yes.
My other thing, besides my political address, everyone needs these two phone numbers. 866 our vote. That's 866-686-8683. I'm not sure about the first three numbers. And the other number is 202-224-3121. 202-224-3121. Those are the numbers you want to call to make sure we get the Freedom to Vote Act passed. Even though our senators here are supportive, you want to call them and ask them to please talk to the other senators, to talk to their senators that they sit around, the ones that they have lunch with, the ones that they talk to. You want them to know that I know Senator Durbin is supporting it. I know Senator Duckworth is supporting it. But how much effort are you putting into getting your fellow senators to get that act passed? We need the carve out for that act. And let me stop, because I'm starting to get on my soap opera about that. But we need to do a carve out for that. And if anyone didn't see him, excuse me, go back to Rachel Maddow's show the other night when she talked to Senator Warnock. He was absolutely awesome. She showed his speech at the Senate that day. And it tells you, we don't have to get 60 plus. We don't have to have 60 votes on the other side to get it passed. We can do a carve out. They did it last week. They're about to do it again. We can get a carve out for voting rights.
Okay, Betty,
If we don't,
I want to talk about that, but first, I want to step back for a second, just in case people have not been tuned in about these pieces of legislation. Can you take us back to when they first started? They introduced HR1, they introduced S1. I mean, can you tie it into what they proposed before and what it is now, and why it's really important that we need to pass these these acts before too long, before we lose our democracy? Like, why is it so critical right now? What is in these bills?
Let me do it by giving an example. Texas has changed all of their voting laws. Several other states have changed their voting laws so that if the Secretary of State is the person that determines who got the votes in your state, and they decide they don't want the Democrats' votes to count, the new person can decide, okay, those votes don't count. They can just throw them out. It's not just Texas that's doing that. Florida's doing it. I can't even think of how many states have it. There may be about 13 that have changed their rules so that the elected official can change the vote. Georgia is another one, state. They can change the vote. Now, the Freedom for the People Act, the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, all of those laws will be null and void if we pass those two acts, because federal laws supersede state laws. But if we don't get them passed, and if they don't change them, the other parties will just decide, oh, well, I don't like the vote that came in. So it just says, oh, it says the Democrats won, the Republicans lost. I don't like that. I'm changing it. And they can change it. They've created laws that will allow them to change it. That's the best way I can explain what is happening. The John Lewis Voting Rights Act was initiated because in 2013, the Supreme Court struck down pretty much the 1965 Voting Rights Act. The John Lewis Voting Rights Act brings that back into play. I mean, we're almost at the point where they could decide, well, if you've got on a red dress on election day, your vote doesn't count. They could just say that and get away with it. That's what those two bills stand for. And anybody that thinks that we don't need them, as my grandmother used to say, little ducks. Did I answer your question?
Yes, thanks, Betty. Now, you mentioned the Voting Rights Act was struck down in 2013. Tell us exactly, can you tell us exactly what was in there that's so important that they struck down that allowed all of these other voter suppression bills to pop up?
You know what? Off the top of my head, I'm trying to remember exactly what they did that made it so egregious. And I'm drawing a blank, and maybe it'll come to me in a minute. But I am drawing a blank, but I know the purpose was to tear down the 1965 Voting Rights Act. And the John Lewis Voting Rights Act was to bring it back. I'm sorry.
Yes, so thank you for that, Betty. I think that many of us here on the call probably have questions about those pieces of legislation, but I know many more people of us on this call have actually organized events around Illinois in solidarity with what you were doing in Chicago, which is fantastic. And maybe somebody who organized an event for the John Lewis Voting Rights Act would like to speak on that.
I would love to hear from them. Illinois, by the way, has the best, Chicago specifically, has the best voting laws in the country, barring none. We have early voting, we have same-day registration, we have vote by mail. Whenever somebody starts fighting about that, I always get to say when I'm on a national call, Chicago already has that. So just so you guys know, we got the best.
Can you talk a little bit about what you were saying about talking to our senators? Many people say to me, oh, our senators are on board already. And so do we need to bother them? They probably have other
It's-
things to think about.
No, it is not enough that they're on board. We do need to bother them. We need to send them emails. We need to call them. We need to thank them for being on board, but we also need to tell them we need them to go to their counterparts and convince them. You know, Durbin's been there a while. He knows Manchin really well. He needs to talk to him. Make sure he understands. Make sure he gets it, because obviously he doesn't. But they are the ones, they can talk to their counterparts better than we can. They don't respect the call from Illinois to Virginia, but they respect a conversation with the senator from Illinois. So we have to ask them to, it's not just enough for them to say they're supportive. They've got to do more.
So I know a lot of people are wondering about the impact of the filibuster right now. And also there are many things on the table. Build Back Better, there's the debt ceiling, I mean, what kind of thing would you say to Senator Durbin right now if he was in front of you?
If he was in front of me,
Yeah.
actually, I would tell him, you know what you need to do. You know what you should be doing. The fact that we are still sitting around waiting on the Freedom for the People Act is ludicrous. You know how important it is. You know what it means. You know how many people are going to lose their right to vote. How dare you not spend your every waking minute trying to convince other senators to support this bill? But I know him personally, and so maybe I could say that like that, and everybody else.
Oh, I love it. Okay. On that call with Dr. Barbara Arwine from Arwine. Firstly, can you tell us about Dr. Arwine and her Transformative Justice Coalition?
Okay, so Dr. Barbara Arwine and I have been friends for years and years, and she actually was with Lawyers for Civil Rights, and she actually put together the 866 Our Vote protection line, which is all over the country now. But she was responsible for putting that into place. And I think, I'm not sure I gave that number right. 866 Our Vote. What is OUR? Who's looking at their phone? What is OUR? I'm going to put them in the chat because everybody's asking for them. But OUR, let me look at my phone. OUR would be 687. Okay, 8683. 866 Our Vote. 866 Our Vote is a number where if you don't know whether you're registered or not, if you don't know when the election is in your area, if you go to have a problem on election day, you can call that number and they'll send someone out to help you. And it works all over the entire country. And if you're not registered to vote, they can register you to vote when you call that number. And now I was answering another question I forgot because I got excited because I gave the wrong number and I don't like to do that.
That's okay. Betty, when we first met, I do remember one of the first meetings that we had together, and it was all about voter engagement. And the first thing and our homework was to find out what our political
Address.
address is. And can you tell us a little bit about all the things that you identified at the top of this call, and then how do we do that?
How do you find your political address?
Yes.
Well, the new thing today is Google, but you can go online to Chicago Board of Election if you're in Chicago and put in your address, and all of that information will pop up. If you're a registered voter, you know, all that information pops up. Now, why you need to know that? In this past few months, we had a census and they drew new lines in the legislature. And we had 18 African-American state representative districts. And I believe it's now down to 14. And allegedly that's because they have what they call African-American influential districts. But that's because people said when Barack Obama was elected, we became a non-racial, this country was no longer racially divided. That is the farthest thing from the truth you will ever hear. We are still racially divided. Chicago is one of the most racially divided cities in the country. But I have been working with the Redistricting Coalition in Change, Illinois. And we have a people's map, which you can go online, chicagoswards.com, and see the new wards. We came up with an Asian ward for the first time in the history of Chicago, which they so rightly deserve. Asians deserve their own ward. But that's happening because of redistricting. Going back to what I was saying about legislation, your legislators are elected every 2 years. If you don't like the maps they drew this time around, vote them out. The Senate varies on the number of years they run, different years, but if you don't know who your legislator is, you can't vote them out. If all you do is just go in and whatever name is familiar to you, you need to start paying attention. There are classes that people take. You need to pay attention. There are judges that some people go in and they just say, yes, 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 yes. Well, if you hear a judge make a decision that you don't like, make a note of it, write it down somewhere. So when you go in to vote for a judge, even if they still get reelected, you have the ability to have said and the right to say no. And you know, well, I voted no because he was a bad judge. You have Cook County commissioners. You have aldermen. You have committeemen. They're party people. They do. Let me give you an example of what committeemen do. When Emil Jones, some time ago, I believe, stepped down as state senator, and he was going to make sure his person got appointed in his place, Kwame Raoul at that time, and I tell the story all the time about him, he ran against Toni Preckwinkle. He lost, and I told him, volunteer in her office, in her campaign, work for her. So he went to volunteer on constituents with her constituents because he was a lawyer and he could learn from working with her. Well, when Emil Jones left, Toni Preckwinkle, Leslie Hairston had what is called the weighted vote. That's how Kwame Raoul got to be a state senator. And today he's our attorney general. But it's kind of like if you can't beat them, join them in a sense. But the other side of the coin was he learned a lot from working in that political office. And because she had gained respect for him, even though he ran against her for her office, she had enough respect to see what he could become ultimately. And she voted for him. So when you see people running for committeeman and running for alderman and running for state senator and state representative, don't just look at it as if, oh, well, that's just another office. They make decisions that affect your lives. They voted and created the bill that caused Governor Pritzker yesterday to sign the new maternity board bill. That's going to help with the midwives, because there's so many people who don't have insurance and get pregnant, and they need the assistance of a midwife during their pregnancy. But that was done by state legislators. And I'm going off on, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, thank you, Betty. I think those were great examples. If anybody does have any questions, you can feel free to put them in the chat.
For those of you who are downstate, you have the same opportunities. We just have different people. You have legislators down there that you should be looking at. Look at their voting record. It's public record. If they voted for things you didn't like, kick them out. That's how I feel. Or maybe you should run against them. That's another thing. Don't be afraid to run for election. If you don't win the first time, you might win the second time. And I'm not saying that we don't have, wait a minute. Yeah, many of our legislators are Republicans downstate. Yeah, but there have been some good Republicans. There aren't a lot of them now, but there have been. I mean, I was a big Jim Thompson supporter. I supported Richard Ogilvie. And way back when Fred Hampton was killed, Hanrahan was the state's attorney, and he was partly responsible for that murder. And we learned, we in the African-American community learned how to do what we call the push hop at that time. And at that time, most African-Americans voted Democrat, and you could pull one lever down and that voted for all the Democrats. And we taught people how to pull that one lever down and then go to state's attorney's row and push his lever up and pull the Republican down. And that's how we got rid of state's attorney. You know, the people, another little quick story, the people in Brunswick where Ahmaud Arbery was killed, his family organized a write-in campaign. And that's how they got rid of the prosecutor who was covering up the case. She is now has been indicted and is going to be going to trial herself. But they did a write-in campaign, and half of that family had never voted before. But after he was killed, they found out the importance of voting. Back to Barbara Armstrong. Transformative Justice Coalition, we now have a John Lewis Good Trouble Voting Institute, and it will return on Saturdays in January. It's they're 1 hour classes, and the information is phenomenal. This first session of classes was on registration. The next session will be on redistricting. So watch for emails. I'll send it to you, Lenny, as soon as it comes out. But Dr. Barbara Armstrong did those votercades that we talked about. Each one that Chicago participated in, they were all over the country. They were all over the country. And that helped to get the vote out. That's how she met the Arbery family in Brunswick, Georgia, getting the vote out. Oh, Yolanda, stop it. See, who's it? Marcy said she liked Edgar. So it's not about the party. It's about the person. And that's why I voted for Chuck Percy every time he ran. He was a Republican, but he was an awesome senator. So I voted for Judy Bartopinka every time she ran because she was a good treasurer. And back in the day when we used to be able to vote for 3 people for state legislator, do you remember that, Marcy? I can't think of her name, but I voted for 2 Democrats and 1 Republican. She was my state legislator. Now I can't remember her name.
Yeah, in downstate here, it was just the opposite. There was always always 2 Republicans and 1
Democrat.
Yeah. But just an FYI, some of the state legislators that are downstate that are Republican, some of them are honestly truly white nationalists. So I mean,
those are the ones you have to try to get out. So you try to get rid of them in the primary. But in the primary, then you have to vote Republican in order to get rid of them. So that may not work either.
I'm a Democratic PC, so I don't think. But also, as far as state rep districts, I'm in the 104, and my rep is a Republican. He's not great, but he's not a white nationalist. But I live in Champaign County. And I live in Champaign. Most of Champaign-Urbana has Carol Ammons. I do not, because I live blocks outside of the 103. I live in the 104. So anyway, but yes, but we also, the 101 and 102 also are have parts of Champaign County in them. And even though my legislator is, my state rep is a conservative Republican, and he particularly is probably not a white nationalist, but the other 2 that are in the 101 and 102, they totally are. There's some of those. One of them was the one who decided that, that started the Chicago should secede from the rest of Illinois.
Secede from the rest of, oh yeah, I remember that.
Yeah, Brad Halebrook. He's one of them. And then the other one is Dan Calkins. So you probably are familiar with those 2 because they really are probably white nationalists.
Right.
Just an FYI.
And can I just say how awesome Lenny is? When I met Lenny, she knew nothing about politics. She was not joking when she said that. And now, whenever anybody talks about voting or voter registration, her name comes up. They say, have you talked to Lenny? So you should get your full credit, Lenny.
Betty, thank you. That is really kind of you to say, but truly I feel like I'm still learning. I learn so much every day, and I learn a little bit more about how things work. And actually I'm learning about how I don't like the way things are set up right now. I really appreciate all your work with the former inmates and in the jails. And I appreciate what you said about Washington winning by margins, probably because of the turnout from those who might have turned out because of that, of your work. And I am, I'm thinking about Ami Gandhi. She was also on that call that you hosted. She's a senior counsel for the Chicago Lawyers for Civil Rights. And one of the last things that she said was that racial inequity is terrible, still, and they continue to exist in Illinois. And voter registration still continues to lag for people of color versus white voters. So that's something. The other thing is that, January is coming up on the anniversary of the, the insurrection at the Capitol. And there are a lot of things that people said about those folks that turned out over there And one of the things that struck me, one idea was that a lot of those folks came out because they felt, disenfranchised. They felt it's either that or they felt privileged enough to, buy tactical gear and jump on a plane and go and storm the Capitol. But what I worry about mostly in Illinois right now, Betty, is getting people, everybody out to vote, not just in Chicago, but all over the state. And
Right.
including the areas that Marcy was talking about where she lives. Because I don't know, I feel like I do worry that we are going to see so many more people drop out of just getting engaged in our process, especially when you hear about, I don't want to get into it too much, but there is this pledge that's going around that the Cook County Democrats are putting out, a loyalty pledge, and that I don't know, I feel really upset about it, actually. This kind of loyalty pledge saying that you have to be loyal to the party no matter what. And that's even before they're slated. Like that's set up to like going backwards, really. That doesn't sound like progress to me. So
We're going backwards. I said we had 18 African-American legislative districts. We're down to 14 now with the new map. And our legislators that we put in drew those maps, and this stuff about African-American influence districts and Hispanic influence districts. The only way we got those legislators when we had 51% of the voting age population in those districts. Now they're redrawing the subcircuit districts. I don't know if those of you who know how subcircuit districts were created. They were created by legislation because back in the day, if you wanted to run for judge, you had to run countywide. And if you ran countywide, most of the judges who were elected had Irish surnames. So in order to get African Americans and Hispanic judges elected, they drew what they call subcircuits. So the 5th subcircuit, for example, is an all African American area. So there's no way you're going to get a white judge out of the 5th subcircuit. But that was the purpose of subcircuit. So when you look at your voter registration card and see subcircuits, that's where it's called your judicial subcircuit. But that is how we got so many African Americans and Hispanics on the bench here in Illinois, because they created subcircuits. Just a little tidbit.
Yeah, that's so super interesting. Thank you for sharing that. I had no idea. Actually, I know very, very little about the judges, and that is really a point of anxiety for me every time I get to that part in the ballot. There are so many names, which is why I'm really glad about voting by mail these days. You can sit down at your kitchen table and
take your time.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So
when we did the votercade, when we got to 191 North Clark, I had gotten my ballot by mail, and it took me all of 15 seconds to vote. I walked in the door, handed my ballot to the person, and they told me just put it in. I dropped it in and came right back out the door, and waited outside for the rest of the people to vote. But vote by mail is just awesome.
Yeah.
I may never vote any other way again. And I'll probably always vote early, but I'll always get a vote by mail ballot.
Hey, Lenny, hey, everybody. I wanted to say something about Durbin and Duckworth to an extent, but Durbin because he's a senior senator representative. His stance on the filibuster is extraordinarily weak. And that's why we weren't able to get that voter legislation passed, because they couldn't get past the filibuster. And because the senators that do have standing, as you say, I don't know what it would take to actually deter Cinema and Manchin, because I mean, there's been tremendous pressure, but they have not yielded to anything. And so I don't know what is going to happen. But one of the things that we can sort of pressure Durbin and Duckworth to, because she follows Durbin's lead, if you will, is around the filibuster. He's extraordinarily weak on that. And we've called him out in the Poor People's Campaign for being weak and not taking a strong stand to end the filibuster. And that's what all the senators actually need to do, because it's an archaic relic from post Reconstruction, and it's a way for a minority to essentially impose their will over the majority. That's what the whole purpose of the filibuster is about. And then I think the other thing that you mentioned around, whether if we can get it, past that possibility, because that's what they don't want to do, and if there's an actual carve out, because my understanding about congressional oversight on there are certain aspects of the Voter Rights Act of 1965, most particularly I think to do with reauthorization, and another aspect, I'm probably not saying it right.
Voter ID.
It wasn't just voter ID, but it had to do with the states, if they wanted to make changes on voter legislation in their states, it had to go through a pre-authorization clearance that was written into the 1965 Voter Rights Act. Well, that was what was struck down in the 2013 Supreme Court decision. And so one of the things that they're looking at, I don't know if the Biden administration is gonna, make a play for this, but they've got a couple of problems. They've got Manchin and of course Sinema, but mainly Manchin. And then they have the Supreme Court. So whether we're going to be able to get around those two things, because the states, so there are a couple of ways to get a lawsuit in front of the Supreme Court. One is that, the states, whatever, can bring a lawsuit themselves, and individuals can bring lawsuits. And so I don't know, I'm sure there's, a motion underway to make that happen. But if we want to mount a campaign on Durbin, and I think we should, and not for just that, there are a whole lot of reasons that we should mount a campaign on Durbin, because Durbin ain't right. When we're talking about what's happening down on the southeast side of Chicago, I mean, he did an end run around the head of the EPA, Regan, to get who is this, Sandra somebody, to come up with this weekend report to essentially bypass the EPA, and so that they can't say, utilize their authority as the head of an agency to say, look, there are civil rights violations, and we enact the civil rights violations in this case, and you cannot permit general iron. So Durbin's handprints are all over that, and they gave, I don't know how many trillion of dollars to Exelon to open up a nuclear plant. Big Durbin's hands are all over that. So we've got a lot of stuff we can talk to Durbin about. He ain't right on a whole lot of stuff.
And that's what you need to do. That is my point.
Yeah.
Just because they're saying, yes, they support the Freedom for the People Act and the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, does not mean that they're all right on other things. Now, I do want to go back to the carve out. They did a carve out to put all those new judges on the Supreme Court. They only needed a 50+1 majority to do that. They just did a carve out last week to pass the bill, the infrastructure bill. So it's not set in stone that the filibuster is the only way to go. But we've got to keep fighting and keep calling Durbin, keep calling Tammy. That's what we can do in Illinois. And if we have people in other states that are family members or friends, call them and ask them to call their senators. Because if we don't get that act passed, shame on us. I don't even know if I want to blame the senators. And before I go, Lenny, I'm going to put my email in the chat, because some people were asking how could they reach me. So I'm going to put my email address in the chat.
Yeah.
Hey, just to let you know, there is, like, from the Vote by Mail group, we do have a calling, we do have like a calling thread. Every Tuesday, we're reminded to either call or email Durbin and Duckworth about the filibuster and about the 2 voting rights bills. So several of us are calling or emailing them every Tuesday, because on Wednesday there's that caucus lunch or something. The Democratic caucus has a luncheon every Wednesday, so we do it before then. So then they can say, "Hey, several of my constituents called me about the filibuster and the voting rights bills." So yeah, I have to credit Rose Colosino with it. She couldn't be here tonight, but it's her baby. She's the one who pushed for this. So several of us are doing that. Hopefully it's going to do something, but who knows?
That's great.
Yeah, is anyone else on here? Has anyone else on here called Durbin or heard from Durbin's office since you have been calling them?
Maybe it's just me, and maybe I do it too many times, but I generally get a response when I call.
I do too. There's always, especially when you email, there's a checkbox. Do you want the senator to respond to you? So normally I get a form letter. But
it's a response nevertheless.
Well, thank you so much, Betty, for jumping on and for sharing all of your expertise and your experiences with us. And I've always really appreciated the time that you've been able to spend with us. You are all over with the many coalitions that you either lead or are part of. So thank you for that, because that is really what it's all about. We know that we can't do everything on our own. I know I can't. And so that's why I lean on others like you, and also Sheila, who's on this call, who was absolutely involved with our convening that we had. And I appreciate you both so very much. Thank you, Marcy, for sharing all your actions.
Thank you.
We really appreciate so much of this. This is what it's all about when we come together on these calls, to share and to learn and to also keep each other motivated. Because there's going to be more to come in 2022. This is going to be our last ILVOTE call of the year. So anything that you want to share into the chat right now, including Betty or Sheila, any actions that you have with your own groups or meetings?
I'll just go back to my phone numbers, 202-224-3121. And you can call your congressman or your senator at that number. And then the 866-688-8683 or 866-OUR-VOTE. Information to have in your phones for future references. And I want to say thank you, Lenny. Thank you to all of you who took time to listen to me ramble on and go all over the place with what I was talking about when I was trying to answer questions. But thank you for having me. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Betty brings us around and through the fire and back, and through the fire and back again. And that's what it's all about. Thank you.
Happy holidays to everyone.
Thank you, Betty. Thank you, everyone, for joining. Please stick around if you want to join us for the Indivisible Illinois statewide call. Otherwise, have a great rest of 2021, and we'll see you in 2022.
Yeah, I wonder, I wonder if people didn't get any emails about tonight's statewide call, because I'm trying to remember because I don't think I got an email, so maybe that may have